Sometimes parentheses might look scary. Sometimes they might be a problem, especially when solving for x, which is what we're going to learn in Unit 3 and forward. So in Lesson 2.4, we're going to learn one of the techniques to deal with parentheses, to eliminate the parentheses, and it's called the distributive property. The distributive property, as its name says, we distribute the number, the variable, the sign, whatever we have in front of parentheses, by multiplying it times every single term inside of the parentheses. So in this case, we have a 2 in front of this parenthesis. So let's multiply times every term, starting with the 4x squared. So 2 times 4x squared. Then 2 times 3x. And it's very important, especially with negative. We always carry the signs, but especially with negative, we don't forget to carry the sign. Negatives tend to change things, so it's very, very, very important. We never forget about carrying the negative, keeping the negative. And then 2 times 5. That's it. We distributed the 2 to every term inside of the parentheses. We can get rid of the parentheses, and now we just need to simplify. Remember, multiply variables with variables and numbers with numbers. So 2 times 4x squared, 2 times 4 is 8, and then we write the x squared. Then 2 times 3, x is 6x, and remember the negative, so this is negative 6x. And finally, 2 times 5 is just 10. And this is the simplified expression without the parentheses, after applying the distributive property. But it works with everything, not only numbers. In this case, we have a variable, actually a variable with an exponent, x to the power of 3, but it's the same idea. X to the power of 3 times 4x squared. Then x to the power of 3 times 3x, and the negative. Don't forget about the negative. I will repeat it every single time on this video. Don't forget about the negative. And then x to the power of 3 times 5. There we go. We distributed the x to the power of 3 to every single term in this parenthesis. Now we can simplify by doing the operations. Remember, multiply variables with variables and numbers with numbers. Also, multiplication of exponents, as we learned in lesson 2.2. These two rules is all we need to simplify, because x to the power of 3 times 4x to the power of 2. The 4 is just 4, and the exponents, we add them, so this is x to the power of 3 plus 2, which is x to the power of 5. Then x to the power of 3 times 3x. The 3 is just a 3, and then x to the power of 3 times x to the power of 1. Remember, from Basic Algebra course, Unit 2, when a number or a variable does not have an exponent, it's an exponent of 1. So this turns into 3x to the power of 4 with the negative in front. That's why it's important to carry the negative. And finally, x to the power of 3 times 5 is just 5x to the power of 3. And this is a simplified version without parentheses. What if we have a parenthesis in front of the negative in front of the parenthesis? Sorry. A negative, well, even though we don't have a number, is technically a -1, if we want to say it, but it's just distributing a negative. We just take the negative times 4x squared, then the negative times 3x, and one more time, please carry the negative. Don't forget to take the negative with you. And finally, the negative times 5. After this, we just simplify by doing the operations and the multiplication. Very important rule of exponents in multiplication. A positive times a negative is equal to a negative, and the negative times a negative equals to a positive. So in the first case, we have a negative and a positive, so the answer is negative. Then we have a double negative, that means the answer is positive. And finally, one more time, a negative and a positive gives us a negative. As we can see, if we pay attention, when distributing a negative in a parenthesis, all we're doing is changing the signs of all the terms in the parenthesis. And to finish up this lesson, let's put everything together. We now have the 2, the x to the power of 3, and we have the negative. So let's distribute it in the parentheses. negative 2x to the power of 3 times 4x squared, then negative 2x to the power of 3 times 3x, and one last time, bring the negative with you. Do not forget about the negative. And finally, negative 2x to the power of 3 times 5. There we go. The term has been distributed to every other term in the parentheses. Now we just proceed to simplify. Remember, we always multiply variables with variables and numbers with numbers. Also, the multiplication of exponents we learned in lesson 2.2. And one more time, positive times negative equals negative, and negative times negative equals positive. You can pause the video if you need more time to review these rules that we will need to simplify this equation, this expression. All right, so now that we know the rules, let's multiply. Negative 2x to the power of 3 times 4x squared. Well, the 2 and the 4 is 8. The x cubed and the x squared is x to the power of 5, and the negative is negative. Then 2x to the power of 3 times 3x. The 2 and the 3 is 6. X to the power of 3 and x is x to the power of 4. And we have a double negative, so it turns into positive. And finally, 2x to the power of 3 times 5. The 2 and the 5 multiply, and that's a 10, and we keep the negative, so 10x to the power of 3. And one more time, this is a simplified version of the expression we had before, but without parentheses, especially as we are getting into Unit 3 and forward, that we're just going to be solving a lot for variables. This technique will be very helpful.